Let us say a very good morning to Mr. Peter Hitchens. Peter, how are you?
Morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us once more. I don't know whether you were listening to the first hour of the show, but I had John Rentoul on, who still seems to have a bee in his bonnet about you and about your assertion that we're living in a police state. So I've been asked by him to put it to you. What do you say now that apparently the lockdown is coming to an end?
Well, I'll say what I have to say when I discover what actually happens, if you don't mind. I wouldn't say exactly that we live in a police state. I'd say we live in a country where we have sacrificed quite a lot of our freedoms, and I think a lot of them are not coming back. I think, for instance, imagine, here's something which must concern quite a few people, what will be happening if weddings begin again? I suspect, for instance, that if guests are allowed in any numbers, they'll almost certainly have to be registered. There'll be checking of their phones and apps to make sure that every detail of their presence, everything that used to be something which one just did, is going to become something which one has to register, record, and will be in some ways the property and at the permission of the state. Instead of assuming that we can do what we like, we've now been changed into people who have to ask permission for everything we do.
Yes.
We're all now reduced to this state of sort of doggy begging, where we're saying, "Oh, please, Mr. Johnson, will you let us go out?
Yes.
Will you let us someone in the park? Can I actually go and see my relatives without wearing a spacesuit? Will I be able to go abroad? Please, let me." Well, this is no attitude for free man. Or a free woman.
No, quite. And it's actually, it's characterised, Peter, isn't it, by the questions that...
You establish your reason for doing it. And to say, let's see what actually happens here. I think there's still quite a strong faction among the government's advisors of the zero COVID mob who actually think that restrictions probably have to last forever. I don't think that faction has by any means gone away.
No.
In any area where we're subjected to tests, if you remember, when Gordon Brown announced that we're going to be how many tests it was before we joined the Euro, it became clear later on that meant we weren't going to join the Euro, because the crucial thing about tests is who decides when they've been passed. Yes. Who will decide when these tests have been passed? So I'll welcome any liberations which come my way, but I'm not actually completely convinced yet that we're going to be as free as we used to be, or even particularly free by the standards of today after the announcements this afternoon. Let's see.
Yes, I mean, my sense is this, that the people of this country, by and large, are like me and you, i.e. we don't like to be told what to do, and we will emerge from this with that same view. There are some, there's no doubt, and many of them are in the media, who, when they appear at these media briefings, ask ridiculous questions like, when can I go and hug my mother? Well, you know, if you want to go and hug your mother, I would suggest you go and hug your mother at the risk of being, you know, swatted down by Ofcom for saying such a thing. You know, so reckless am I. I'm recommending that people go and hug their own relatives. You know,
Gosh,
but I think it's ridiculous.
That is reckless, Mike. Again, here we are in a country where we have to be careful what we say. On air, or indeed in other places as well. A country which has spawned recently a whole mushroom crop of informers all over the suburbs, dobbing in their neighbours for having too much exercise or whatever it is. Unthinkable, you would have said, if someone had described current Britain to you 10 years ago. It's ridiculous. You've been reading too many novels, but no, here it is.
Yeah. No, true.
You have to be careful what you say on air, and you have to be careful that your neighbours don't inform you.
Yeah, quite. I mean, certainly. But I think as many more people begin to realise what they've missed, because I think the problem with not having something is that you don't, after a while, you don't miss it. But if once you start to get a bit of a taste of it again, I think the thirst for it and the hunger for it comes back. And so my hope and my faith in humanity is that people will go, actually, I quite like this walking around in the street. I quite like meeting somebody for a drink or a cup of coffee. I quite like actually being a member of the human race again.
I'm not sure. I think that an awful lot of people have grown used to this. I think that a surprising number of people quite like it. They readily swap actual liberty for notional safety, and I think that that's been established. There's been enormous support for this and enormous compliance with it. And I think that anybody who was thinking that maybe this was a country which would resist the sort of Chinese-style surveillance, which may well be coming our way, can now relax in the knowledge that if it's sold properly by sufficient amounts of fear and sophisticated propaganda, people will buy it. And that's been, for me, the most dispiriting
Yeah.
experience. And we are now, when this began, this is all metaphorical in case anybody takes it literally, we were like someone who's been falsely accused of a crime, railroaded into prison, who initially loudly protested his innocence, but then realized there's no point in that because no one's listening, and is now bargaining for a parody of the freedom that he used to have. You can let me out if I'm tagged.
Yeah.
Please, I'll wear a tag. I'll wear a conical yellow hat on my head. If only you'll let me go.
Yes.
Is the position we're now in. As supplicants begging for scraps of the freedom which we used to take as our birthright. That's the transformation. We've had a revolution in this country. And it's a revolution of power in which the state is immensely more powerful than it was before. And conformism is immensely more powerful. And dissent is not merely feeble, but also actively disapproved of and disliked. And I get it all the time. If ever I leak out into areas where I appeared on Channel 4 News last week, a discussion about freedom of speech. And there on Channel 4 News, of course, you meet an audience rather different from yours.
Yes.
I was pelted with slime. How dare I defend the idea that we used to be a more free country than we are now? It was only free for fat white heterosexual males or some such rubbish, and not free for normal people. All kinds of rubbish. I was even told that women couldn't go up to the bars of pubs until 1983 in the grim, bigoted, hateful, sexist, racist past in which I had dwelt all unknowing for so many years of my what I thought was a free life. There is an actual resentment of dissent now, and that's a very bad situation for a country which hopes to be well governed, because without dissent and opposition, a bad government follows as the night and day.
Well, it's worse, isn't it, than that? Because not only is there resentment, but you're also accused of not only being wrong, but of actually being dangerous. And I noticed that you said that they'd also cut quite a large chunk out of your interview as well.
Well, yes, there was a bit because I was explaining what had actually happened to me and how the University of Portsmouth students had first invited me and then disinvited me, and various aspects of that. And also, I was offered the last word by the presenter, which is nice when you have it.
Yeah.
But when it actually was transmitted, the last word was given to the other guy.
Right.
And I know very well from dealing with left-wing broadcasting organisations that the thing you have to be really quick to get is the last word. This is recorded. So so when Matt Fry offered it to me, I thought, great, that's unusual. And then when it turned out not to have made the cut, I was quite interested.
Yes. It's extraordinary, isn't it, how disingenuous some of these organisations are when they completely and utterly demand clarity and absolute transparency for everybody else. But yet they don't behave like that.
Well, no, it's terribly sad about the BBC, particularly as well. And the Channel 4 one, I mean, I have a sort of joshing relationship with Channel 4 that we know that we're not exactly on the same wavelength, but it's mostly the BBC and the things that they do and the way in which they've shut people like me almost completely down in the past few months is even to me, and I'm used to their behaviour, is even to me quite shocking.
Yeah.
And it's much easier, of course, not to have people on at all than it is to have them on and cut them.
Yeah. Well, John Rentoul, again, this morning was banging on about how, well, you talk to Peter Hitchens every week. What do you mean that he's not allowed? I said, yeah, but one of the reasons that we talk to Peter every week is that very few other people do. And one of the reasons that we like to talk to you is because we like to think we're providing an alternative to what most media organisations do, which is basically to put you on, chop you to bits, have you for 5 minutes, and then dismiss it. And that's rather, we don't do that.
Yeah, we're coming up to the third anniversary of my last appearance on BBC Question Time, for instance, a programme on which I had appeared pretty much once, more or less. So I can't be that bad since 1996. Then suddenly, after March 2018, that was goodbye. And no one ever has explained it to me or offered any reason for it. I just gone. And various other things. I disappeared from the press review on the Andrew Marr show, things like that, which I used to do. I've become not merely a dissident, but a dissident who simply doesn't get. There are still tiny areas into which I can find my way, but it's largely gone.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, isn't it? Let's talk a little bit about the kind of the movement out of this lockdown, because I was upbraided by some listeners earlier because I said, look, of course there are people who are now saying, we'll have to practice social distancing for the rest of the year. We may have to wear masks for the rest of the year. My take on that is, look, if it gets us out, and this kind of feeds into what you were saying earlier of the sort of the captive problem. If it gets us out, if they can open up a pub and a restaurant and they ask me to wear a mask before I go and sit down at a table, I'd rather that than the pub didn't open at all. Do you have any sympathy with that?
Oh, a lot of sympathy with it, but I resent it. I don't. I think that we really shouldn't have to make these bargains, and I fear very much that they will last a lot longer than people think. I make the point: these supposed temporary safety restrictions on airline travel from September the 11th, 2001, still apply.
Yeah,
and I think they'll still apply when I'm dead. It will go on and on. I just wonder how long this, for instance, this mask wearing, which remains scientifically extremely weakly justified, let's put it at its most polite, may continue into the foreseeable future. A lot of people, I reckon, even if the mask decree is finally repealed, a lot of people will continue wearing them this winter to demonstrate their virtue.
Yeah.
And it will become as common as it used to be in various Asian countries.
Yeah.
And that's a change in our society, and therefore those who don't wear them will be under moral pressure to do so. And the sight for school children being made to wear them, it makes me quite cross. I really can't see the justification for this, but on and on it spreads because I have long felt that it's a political rather than a medical gesture, a gesture of submission to an allegiance to the new state in which the health of the people is the highest law, and certainly runs well above human freedom.
Well, it does. And interestingly, still at the weekend, they were rolling out these characters from Sage, giving us these dire warnings that, at any moment this could come back and kill more people. And I mean, you've said over the weekend in your various musings with Christopher Snowdon, who's next up for us with Toby Young on a head-to-head, that, all of these kind of, and I make these arguments with people all the time, that these promises of what would have happened if we hadn't done something, it's almost impossible to square that circle, isn't it? Because you can't, with any degree of accuracy, say, well, this would have definitely happened if we hadn't done that.
Well, you can actually argue more cogently against it by the much hated and hugely misrepresented example of Sweden, which I stress here, I'm not putting forward Sweden as a perfect example of everything that we should have done, because they made some serious messes, particularly with their own care homes. But it's quite clear that Sweden is a very similar society to ours, did not do the things which we did on the grounds that it would prevent these hecatombs of deaths, but has not suffered in actual statistical terms in deaths per million any worse than we have. Now, if the predictions of Imperial College had been true and were as applicable to Sweden as they were to the United Kingdom, then that would have happened. So I think we can say with some confidence that it's very hard to argue that these restrictions have prevented notional deaths. And then you look at the fascinating comparison which can be made between the two American states, Florida and California. And again, you'll find that they took completely different attitudes towards masks and shutdowns and restrictions of all kinds. And yet the difference between the outcomes is surprisingly small. And it would be very hard to argue on that basis that these measures are effective. I still say, I mean, who's to say they wouldn't have any effect at all? But it is ridiculous to claim that it is in some way certain that had we not adopted them, that many more people would have died. I think that it's irresponsible to say. And every time anybody says that, including Mr. Snowden, who gets very irritated when I ask him, my question is, and you know that how, Christopher?
Right. Yes, well, quite. There is no way of in any way, sort of making certain that it would have been true. I was talking to my sister last night. She's lived in America now for the best part of the last 30 years. And she listens to my show pretty much every night when she's finished work. And she says, she can't believe what's happening in Britain. She says to me, none of this would be allowed in America. People just wouldn't put up with it. And I mean, basically where she lives in Connecticut and in New York, life is more or less normal.
Is it now? I had thought that several American states had gone at least as far as we had, but I'll take your word for it. It's very difficult.
Yes, well, they've tried to, but I mean, my son, for example, lives in California. He says to me that California, while it's been in lockdown, is full of people like him who are rather so anti-establishment. And he says none of his friends wear masks. They do what they like. They go where they want. And there's no kind of overarching police presence to try and make them do stuff which is evidently un-American.
very interesting. This is the kind of thing which one needs a lot more reporting on. I don't know, but my point remains this: if you're going to have a discussion based upon reason and scientific knowledge, then that's what you have to stick to. And we all make mistakes. I made one yesterday in my argument with Mr. Snowden. I went a little bit too far in a statement, and I had to pull back from it. We all make mistakes, but the thing is that we have to try very hard to stick to what we know. And as soon as we move away from that, I think that we need to be questioned. And that's one of the problems with the advocates of shutdown, is that they don't actually answer these questions, and they don't like being asked them, and that it remains unanswered. But the problem is everybody's, apart from me, pretty much has moved on from this now.
Yeah.
We're now, as I say, bargaining for a parody of what used to be freedom.
Well, this is it. I mean, people are now saying, and I've seen them saying it, I think probably to you on social media as I've read it about myself, where they'll say, well, what are you going to talk about now that lockdown's being lifted? As if everything's gone back to normal. Well, as you quite rightly say, it hasn't yet. I mean, I would like it to, and it'd be great if it does. But until it does, we will still have plenty to talk about.
Well, you've also got the budget on March the 3rd,
yes,
which will be the first attempt by the government to balance its books, something which it is completely incapable of doing. So we will begin to see the immense, looming, frozen tsunami of inflation and debt, which hangs over our whole country. At a time, I have to say, when my arguments for going for the Norway option of staying in the single market when we left the EU seemed to me also to be looking rather well justified, given what's happening to the City of London and quite a lot of smaller businesses trading with the EU. And I don't think our economy is at all in a good state. We may well be free from some of the restrictions that the government have imposed on us, but we may also be battling with the fact that an awful lot of people don't have jobs anymore and don't have businesses anymore, and that all kinds of horrible things are happening, both to taxation and the value of the currency. And I don't think that anyone is even yet thinking about that, because we're still so, quite rightly, preoccupied with the fact that we're all under house arrest and unable to do things which we used to think were normal.
Well, that's right. And who knows if and when the high street reopens, for example, whether or not people will actually be out and about going back there, because they haven't been there for so long in terms of just, meandering about in and out of shops. They might have got out of the habit of it.
It was always one of the great arguments that when I was an industrial correspondent in the Thatcher era, I was sympathetic to my union contacts, but also I often thought what they were doing was foolish. And there was a particular example, which was before I started writing about it, which I would say to people who went on strike, I said, if you go on strike in a major industry, and in those days strikes went on for a long time, you will alert people to the fact that you're not essential. And what happened to the post office, for instance, when postmen went on strike in the Heath era in the 1970s, was that people realized there were other ways of communicating. It led to a huge increase in the use of telephones and all kinds of other ways of getting things across without putting a stamp on an envelope. And as a result, the postal service began a long decline from which it has yet to come out. And I think when people stop doing something for a long time, they often don't get back to it. And people have got used to buying their goods on the internet. And quite frankly, if the government had provided men in spacesuits to come and deliver our groceries to us, if we promised to stay inside and never go out at all, I think a lot of people would have taken that, and they now want to stick at it. Who wants to go to the supermarket when someone's going to bring the stuff to you?
No, quite. Same thing happened to the printers, didn't it? The NGA, in the days when only certain men of a certain age, of a certain sort of, name, and having been nominated by their father or somebody, could actually type on one of those huge linotype machines, and then suddenly they were no more.
Gone, yeah. I'm afraid that was in many ways a tragedy, because it was a beautiful trade.
It was.
Sorry to see it go, but they would not negotiate the compromise, which would have saved them. And here again, but the damage done by the long absence of anything to its commercial prospects is great. And anything which has been shut down for the past year cannot be sure that its customers are going to come back in anything like the same numbers who used to come. I'm very worried about it. I feel terribly sorry. People mortgage their houses for these small businesses. They go into terrible debt. They take enormous risks. They work all the hours God sends. And there's been nothing they can do to save those businesses over the past year at all. They've just been strangled. And I feel an actual grief about them. And of course, all the other people who will lose jobs, which they thought were secure.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right to feel that way. Peter, great to talk to you as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist, as ever, the voice of common sense, a man who has talked this way ever since the beginning. unlike Dan Hodges, unlike Christopher Snowden, who have both changed their minds on lockdown and who now are firmly in support of them. We'll be doing a head-to-head with Christopher Snowden and Toby Young coming up later on this week. We'll bring you news on that as we can and when we know precisely how it's all going to be rolled out.